which led to his Enlightenment experience up in, Pleasantville, New York, Westchester County, New York. Okay, so stay tuned for future developments.
So here we are, walking along this beautiful tree-lined street with these lovely houses and neighborly people, kids playing as kids will do.
Yeah, Pleasantville, New York. That's not too far from where you live, in the Bronx.
No.
Well, how far? I mean, well, it's a good, maybe 50 miles. Nice little town, though.
Yeah. If I could, I wouldn't mind living in a place like this. But
and over here on the corner is that library you were talking about.
Yeah, it's a library that Marie, my friend Willie, and Marie, his lady love at the time. We became. He was a few years older than me, but I'd say God through him came into my life at a time when my mom had passed away a couple of years before, and he's a musician, and he came into my life, and I really felt God's spirit coming through him when he reminded me, if you want to understand God, when you're smoking that funny stuff, which I did on weekends after my mom died, and you're eating animals, how are you going to understand the God of life when you're partaking of things that deal with destruction? And it was very simple, wasn't complicated language, but there's a saying, words are a chalice to be filled by the Spirit. And indeed, his words were filled by the Spirit. And I acted upon that advice. And I was going to do it just for Lent. But I felt so good. I didn't know about nutrition. I didn't know about starving children, 25,000 a day. I didn't know about cancer, heart disease, linked to what we eat.
So you were lost in the world of the senses, because that was a more immediate relief of the environmental factors that come in many forms for everybody. Everyone has have similar experiences. So he comes into your life and imparts a simple statement that opens up a little window.
Well, it's a simple statement, but it was with somebody with sincerity and who was living more of a path of life. I mean, I was around. My neighborhood was mostly Italian then, and I was around a lot of, the divisions were happening with. You had the hippies, and then you had the greasers, and so when he come into my life.
Was this the 70s?
This is the early 70s, yeah. And he came in, and somebody really affirming life in the midst of destruction. Either people beat themselves up with drugs, or they beat the other people up because their skin was dark. Either way, it was chaos.
So he wasn't taking part in the drugs?
No, not at that point. He had stopped that. And
he was just a friend of yours.
Yeah, we became a support group of two. So we were like, support groups. We were reinforcing each other's direction. And eventually I became vegetarian, and we would go, being he's a musician, we would go downtown to hear, jazz, fusion, all kinds of music, and singers, and we'd travel down to the city to buy our health food, because there wasn't much happening up in the Bronx. And then after about 2 years of hanging out, not all the time, but much of the time, he moved up here to Pleasantville, and I would be still back there and feeling more lonely. I'd be in the bar drinking orange juice or cranberry, and people were drinking the hot stuff, while I'd be with the other people smoking this and popping this and doing that. And one thing I learned to do was, when I gave up the smoking, I picked up on meditation. It was through books. It took me about 3 months to really get that saddle on the wild horse in me. But still, after almost a year, before I came up, I was very down. Almost as down as I was when my mom passed, and I was tempted to go back to the party, and he called me up, and he said, you want to come upstate, which to me was upstate, Pleasantville, you want to be up here for about a week? And I've never been in the woods longer than a day in my life. A picnic, you jump out of the car, you jump in the water, you eat, go home before the sun sets. Maybe I remembered 3 of them with my, my family. So here I was at a time when I was very down. He calls me, I come up here, and we're in search now of the place where I took this poetry book with me, and you'll hear what, I think it's best we tell the story when we're at the actual location.
Okay. All right, so we couldn't find the location you had your experience in. But what did it look like? It was a field, right, or something?
It was a junior high school sized football, baseball field, with neatly cut grass, very short, surrounded by tall grass, surrounded all the way around this rectangular field by trees. And I was sitting on some benches on the outer skirts of the field, in the middle part, and I sat down to do a meditation. And after a meditation, I picked up the book of poetry, and I said I'm going to read out loud to strengthen my vocal cords for when I do have at least once a day a talk with somebody. And so I start reading the poetry out loud. I'm getting the insights, getting the musicality. I look up and see the trees. I see them move with the breeze. I continue reading the poems. I look at the clouds making images. And after about an hour, I felt so peaceful, and I saw a butterfly. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And I look up again, maybe 10 minutes later, I see it flutter. Took a close look how it would flutter and glide, flutter and glide. I said, that's really beautiful. The third time I looked up, it flew by where I was sitting, and it ended up following the cut grass. So when it hit the second angle, it turned, and I said, it's following the line of the cut grass. So it follows all the way down the third side of the field, the third line, hit the fourth intersection, the fourth line, and it came down and it went on some shrubs. I measured where I was sitting to where this actually happened. I came back here about 25 years ago. It was 168 feet distance. So I get this thought, wouldn't it be beautiful if that butterfly could fly on my finger? And I said, another thought said, don't be silly, you can't do that. That only happens in fairy tales. But another thought said, whistle, but whistle high. And I put out my finger, my right finger, as you saw in the picture. I put out my finger and I just let out a whistle looking to my left. High-pitched whistle. The butterfly takes off from the shrub, starts flying towards me, fluttering and gliding, fluttering and gliding. Now I'm watching this coming from 168 feet away, and it landed on my finger. You could put all the stuff I smoked for weekends for a year together, it's the light of a candle compared to sunshine. I was so calm, so peaceful. It wasn't excitement, it wasn't emotionality. And I'm looking at this, now I know called a monarch butterfly. I'm looking at it on my finger, it's tilting its head looking at me, and I ask God a question. Is it true? Was Jesus used to raise someone from the dead, or did he raise them from the deadness of their thinking? What about Elijah? Was he used to raise somebody from the dead? What about Paramahansa Yogananda with the miracles in his autobiography of a yogi? What about Edgar Casey, 8th grade educated, knew more than anybody went to school? This is what I asked God in my head. I didn't verbalize it. Is it true? And from this Maslowian, Genovian peak experience, where my conscious and subconscious were unified with my superconscious, and I felt this Lord our God is one moment, I heard it's true. And I felt like God also said, I know you're lonely, but you're not alone. That made the biggest difference for me to know, to keep climbing up the mountain of truth, the mountain of life, to expand my perceptions of how all religions are connected to the one Creator. And this is what kept me going, to realize this stuff wasn't just hot air and ink on paper. So that's when I realized God is real, like Jacob was called Israel, meaning you struggle with the angel, and it means a seeker after God. That's what the true meaning of Israel means. It's a seeker after God. It's not a piece of land. So this is what I realized, that this is what's possible when we pursue, give God some time a day and do our meditations, as I did before this story, and do your good deeds. So that's all it is. It's not complicated.
Did you sense a joy and a peace that surpasses all understanding? Because that's usually the elements of...
Absolutely. It was a peace. I mean, you can't logically... I never read anywhere. You sit down and read a book of poetry and see a butterfly land 168 feet away, and you whistle, and it'll come to you. But there is a part of us that makes our bodies, that's watching our dreams. It's superconscious, or in religious terms, it's the still small voice.
And that's connected to the Creator, to God.
But that's what we're made
that
of.
Inner consciousness. When we talk about consciousness or the intuition or the, that's sort of like isn't that a connection to the Creator?
Well, that's what it is. God put in the first creation. God put everything of the universe and the earth into a body, clay. It simplifies it, and then breathed the breath of life into each nostril, and a portion of God's soul came into each living being. So we know more than we logically know. We can't figure all this stuff out because logic is like. Again, like I said about Dante, Virgil, logic takes him through hell and purgatory, but logic doesn't take us to heaven. It's intuition, like Goethe said. Intuition is the highest form of reasoning. And that's where you get to that side of the mind, the mind that even manifests the physical brain and body. And that's what you'll discover when you withdraw the tide.
What we call it the spiritual self.
The spiritual self, right. When the tide of consciousness is taken more away from the five senses and is accentuated on your sixth sense, as Evelyn Underhill would say, who wrote the book Mysticism, 2,000 Years of Mystics she wrote about, and it's focused on your sixth sense, your soul. That's meditation, where you discover your spiritual body. So this is how, yes, I felt the joy, I felt the deepest peace, I felt when we hear the words Holy Spirit, I experienced it. And I realized this is real. This is real. Israel. This is real. God is real. We're all connected, and it depends on our will how much we want to uncover how much we are truly made in the image and likeness, to overcome the conditioning that teaches us we're not. We're disconnected. We're divided and conquered. We're in chaos. We're not in harmony. We're not in place of wisdom or light. And these are the keys for life. And so why I'm saying this story and why Anonymous is being somewhat revealed is to let people know I'm not talking like a parrot when I recommended all these teachers in the past who are way up more on the mountain than me, who know these truths also and more. And especially with the Master Masters, where the man who gave his life at the height of his life, Jesus, who became the Christ, was Christed. But from all religions, anybody who tunes into that ever-existing loving power called the Christ will be transcending their five senses and discovering we're all made of spirit and we're all connected. And unfortunately, it gets divided up in religious mentalities of playing checkers with each other instead of experiencing by practicing their meditation and everybody closing our mouths and listening to the Spirit of God. And then we could communicate and see what we have in common, not what we disagree with. Because we will disagree with people in our own faith. Because if you go higher up, that tree branch sees more of the sunshine than a lower branch. But the higher up we go, the more compassionate we should get. We all come from the one source of love, light, truth, and it's all connected. And this is what all the great teachers of every faith have known. They discovered their innate nature, which is love, wisdom, peace, joy. And there is room for long suffering, because when you see people suffering, you don't always feel so joyful. You feel sad. But that's only one facet of the many jewels of our diamond of life, where the other ones are compassion and joy and wisdom and strength. So
before this happened, you were in a place of not knowing, and you asked the question, is it true that Jesus rose people from the dead? Do you want to go into why you were in that state and why you were searching?
Sure. My mom died, when I was 16. I was told the night she passed how bad she was. I didn't know she was that bad. I didn't know she was that sick with cancer. Although part of me knew. As I was saying, we know deep inside more than we know with our rational brains. So I painted a skull on my door, or even months before I was told. And then when I found out the night they told me how sick she was, it was the night she passed, and that started my search, because it got me out of my robot, as Gurdjieff would say, the robot, the mechanical mind, and I asked questions with my heart and my head. I wasn't going to a church. Is there a God? Where does she go? One of the first things that happened was a few months later I had a dream with her, and she looked so beautiful, and I felt I felt such a joy, and she told me telepathically, "I'm okay, don't worry." And that's what I felt in my peak experiences I've had, in my deepest meditations. I felt a deep knowingness of peace. And of course, later on, I tried reading various books. I mean, I read the Bible. Genesis was good. Exodus, I exited. Who begot who wasn't doing it for me. And had I started with the New Testament, I would have got right into it. Then I discovered Yeats and the Golden Dawn, and then Carlos Castaneda, but there was too much there with the magic and willpower, self-will, without humbleness of connecting to the bigger will. And then a woman told me about Edgar Cayce, and first vegetarian woman I met. She told me about Cayce, and I discovered reading There Is a River, the first biography. I put tears in my eyes, but I didn't believe what I was reading. I questioned it until 3 years later I had that butterfly experience, and it let me know that these things are not just ink on paper and hot air. And that's encouraged me to, it's like God said, I know you're lonely, but you're not alone.
Well, I brought that up because there could be people listening, or, I mean, we know there are people out there, whether they're listening or not, that are in that place of experiencing something painful and they haven't experienced it, and I just wanted to make that as, if you're in that place, what Anonymous is telling you is that he has experienced that which is, you've heard about, but that which is real, that can bring you out of that lonely or dark place.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, as you know, we're doing these talks, we're not selling anything. You can see my face now, but you don't know my name. I'm not looking to get people knocking on my door or write me letters. I'm just trying to say that this is true, and if you really have a little faith, evidence of things unseen, you don't see good news, you don't hear good news, but if you have the faith, see, where did that come from? Whistle and whistle high for that butterfly to come. I never read such a thing, but I didn't see it would happen, but I had the faith, and from that, it actually happened. So I hope it says something to you all, and realize that God is no respecter of persons, rich or poor, black, white, brown, yellow. You know, it doesn't matter. You know, we're all His children and her children. And
I like that imagery of the imagery of the butterfly at that interesting moment where you transition from not knowing, and there's some relation between the butterfly, like where the butterfly transforms into from the cocoon to a beautiful.
That's
and
right.
and that moment of transition that you were talking about, where you experience that which is beyond understanding, and then the joy that overflows. It's almost like
before that, you said a very important thing. You see, the butterfly has to withdraw. It has to build a cocoon. You have to be isolated for a while. You already feel isolated, but you have to be alone, and you have to face that loneliness. Has to become an aloneness, but in the cocoon phase,
you have to depth of that.
Yeah, you have to withdraw, and you have to build your cocoon. You know, and the beauty also is it goes from the caterpillar goes to the earth. And in the cocoon phase, it'll come out a butterfly and go in the air, which is a symbol for Native Americans and for the spirit world. So you're having a transformation from earthliness to the spirit life in the same life, and that's metaphorical with the butterfly. And you know, so in that sense, yeah, there is a withdrawal and there is an isolation, and you just have to have the faith that something that put us here, there has to be something better. That's going to transform you if you turn yourself over to Him and her and go through that process of hibernation before the rebirth and regeneration. And that, you know,
and
in
the
the
stories
Bible,
abound of that experience. Many of St. Paul, like Joan of Arc, these sort of St. Francis, these transformative experiences that change you.
absolutely, and all the people we've
So
been
there's a lot
talking
of things too, a lot of resources.
Well, even more recent examples, these people in our lifetime, you know, we talked about Carver and Teresa Newman and, you know, Paramahansa Yogananda and Kriyananda and the many others we haven't talked about yet, and the people.
And Edgar Cayce.
Edgar Cayce. So there are plenty of examples because God's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So what needs to change is us, our perception, and our experiences. So in that sense, you know, you can read all these people's lives, and they will inspire, if you find the right book and the right person that writes about it, well. But mostly,
only experience it becomes real. Otherwise, you're just reading it and you're saying, "Wow, that sounds great."
Yeah. It'll inspire you, but then you have to put into practice the things they put into practice. So that's a big key. That's a very big key. So this is the Pleasantville and the Pleasant View in Pleasantville, the Holy Spirit experience. Even though we didn't find the outer space, the inner space is still here. It remembers like it was today, and that's one experience, but I don't need to carry on with my experiences too much. The important thing is I'm not super educated. I don't
just to show if you're looking, it's there.
Absolutely. God is
asking you shall receive.
That's right.
Seeking you shall find. Right. Knocking the doors shall be open to you.
No respect of persons, color, name, station in life, education, doesn't matter. What matters is your sincerity, and you really ask from your heart and your head. That's the combination. It's the heart and the head. You want to be a whole person. You got to be using your discernment down here, but also, your intuition. People could say the right things, and but if you don't sense the experience and what they're saying, you got to be wary. So it's there for everybody, and this is the thing. It's a spiritual democracy. This is what people need to understand. God is no respecter of persons. He's not into titles and the education and the money. It's about your heart and your mind. That's your treasure. Where your heart is, that's where your treasure is. And so I hope, I pray that those listening will realize now that this isn't just hot air. It's a reminder of a true experience that let me know, so I don't sound like somebody, like a parrot, just parroting things that they're reading, that these things are possible for all of us. I'm not an exception to this.
This concludes this discourse.
So I get this thought, wouldn't it be beautiful if that butterfly could fly on my finger? And I said, another thought said, don't be silly, you can't do that. That only happens in fairy tales. But another thought said, whistle, but whistle high. And I put out my finger, my right finger, as you saw in the picture. I put out my finger and I just let out a whistle looking to my left. High-pitched whistle. The butterfly takes off from the shrub, starts flying towards me, fluttering and gliding, fluttering and gliding. Now I'm watching this coming from 168 feet away, and it landed on my finger. You could put all the stuff I smoked for weekends for a year together. It's the light of a candle compared to sunshine. I was so calm, so peaceful. It wasn't excitement, it wasn't emotionality. And I'm looking at this, now I know called a monarch butterfly. I'm looking at it on my finger, it's tilting its head looking at me, and I ask God a question. Is it true? Was Jesus used to raise someone from the dead, or did he raise them from the deadness of their thinking? What about Elijah? Was he used to raise somebody from the dead? What about Paramahansa Yogananda with the miracles of his autobiography of a yogi? What about Edgar Casey, 8th grade educated, knew more than anybody went to school? This is what I asked God in my head. I didn't verbalize it. Is it true? And from this Maslowian, Genovian peak experience, where my conscious and subconscious were unified with my superconscious, and I felt this Lord our God is one moment, I heard it's true. And I felt like God also said, I know you're lonely, but you're not alone.